Cuphead is one of the hardest platformer games to exist with 3 modes of varying difficulty. But what if there was a 4th harder mode, surpassing that of even the fabled S rank? To achieve this 4th mode, we're going to have to get into the modded side of Cuphead. In particular, Cuphead Master Quest. This mod takes Cuphead to the next level, adding new boss attacks, increasing time length, and overall bringing Cuphead beyond the likes of anything in the original game. But that's not hard enough. I'm giving myself 16 hours to beat this insanely difficult mod, and if I surpass the time limit, it's all over. Of all my existing challenges, this is my most ambitious. This is Cuphead Master Quest. After creating a new save file, went on right away to max out on coins from the first 2 run and guns. Now, Master Quest busts every level in the game except for the run and gun, so fortunately these first 2 took no time at all and I was off to see pork rind. I quickly picked up roundabout and spread and I was off to the first boss, the root pack. I could already notice how much faster each attack was on Master Quest. While I didn't mind phase 1 all that much, the balls of dirt style shutout came much faster and I could only imagine what future bosses would look like. Phase 2 saw me fighting Ollie Bulb, one of the easiest phases in Cuphead. Well, here in Master Quest, even the easiest bosses are buffed so much and you can see just how much faster these tiers were falling. Nonetheless, I was at the top of my game and I used my many hours of practice to beat this phase most of the time without losing too much HP. Not gonna lie, Master Quest was looking pretty easy so far, and from the way our first boss was going, 16 hours was going to be way more time than I needed. Oh, never mind. Yeah, this final phase of the root pack was a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be. Chauncey shot out his I-beam so fast and there were a lot more homing carrots on screen than usual. 10 minutes had already went by and I hadn't even made it halfway through the final phase yet. Doing a little math, I had about 50 minutes to spend on each of the 19 bosses if I wanted to beat my goal of 16 hours. I was really gonna have to step up my game in order to complete these bosses, especially since this was my first time playing Master Quest. But since I still had some extra coins left over, I took a small break from the root pack to buy Smoke Bomb, which ended up being a real lifesaver for the final phase. Using Smoke Bomb to dash through the carrots and jumping up every now and then to bait Chauncey's I-beams, it was only a matter of survival to get our first boss out of the way. I keep this up all day. Let's go! We didn't even lose HP, baby. I don't think it was an S rank because we didn't get all our parries, but I do not care, dude. Wait, yo! S rank! Let's go! Dude! Things were off to a great start with the surprise S rank on the root pack. And what's more is I was only 15 minutes into this challenge, which took off a lot of pressure. I was hoping I could continue this type of playing for our second boss, Goopy Legrand. But to say the least, I already noticed a huge increase in difficulty. Things were looking fine in phase 1 until all of a sudden Goopy left the screen. He had jumped so high that he exited my field of view, and this alone was enough to mess up many of my runs. But things only got harder in the second phase. On most of Goopy's jumps, there was such a small margin for errors. If I dashed a second too late or early, it would be back to phase 1. Not to mention, Goopy would sometimes change up the timing of his jumps, which did an amazing job of faking me out. But at least Goopy only slid around a little in the final phase, so it wouldn't be that bad. Wait, what are these guys doing here? As a complete surprise, they added 2 of these mini Goopies from the first run and gun, which made this final phase so much harder. You could shoot them to stop them from running around, but a few seconds later, they'd be back up trying to end our run. Comparing Goopy to our previous boss, this was miles ahead in difficulty, and I knew I was going to need a well thought out strategy to complete this boss. While I wanted to get Goopy out of the way, I kept dying without making too much progress, so I figured I could use the help of Super Art 1. While I wasn't required to beat all 3 mausoleums to complete this challenge, being able to build up a super would be a huge help and allow me to do a lot of extra damage. So I took a little break from Goopy to beat the first mausoleum. These goes flew super fast and my parry timing had to be on point, but after about 15 minutes I had unlocked Super Art 1 and I was heading back to Goopy. At this point, I had spent up almost an hour of time and I was glad to still be ahead of schedule. But I didn't want to let my guard down because it could only take a few mistakes to potentially spend hours on a single boss. Equipping Smoke Bomb and my newly acquired Super Art 1, Goopy had to be going down soon. And taking a break to unlock my super ended up being a good use of time. I was already making it through the first 2 phases much faster and gaining some decent practice on the final phase. In a few minutes after the hour mark, I found our second boss completed. Come on, we have to be getting close. Yes! Oh, let's go, 1 HP, baby. Oh my gosh, yes. We were now onto Ribby and Croaks, and oh boy, was phase 1 hard to follow. Not only were the fists Ribby sent out much faster than expert mode, but there were also quite a few more of them. And to top it off, Croaks spit out so many fireflies, which only made dodging the fists harder. I found roundabout worked well when Ribby shot out the fists, and I'd switch over to spread during any downtime. Using this strategy, I started to make it to phase 2 pretty often. The attacks in this phase were sped up a ton. Many of the planets Ribby sent out were very close together, and Croak's gust of wind definitely didn't make this any easier. Even the occasional fist attack threw me off guard a few times because of how fast it was. However, I can say this phase was super quick for whatever reason, so while the attacks were fast, I usually beat it without losing more than 1 HP. But I couldn't say the same thing about the final phase, however. First of all, it was really long, and right when I thought I had finished the final attack, the slot machine would just keep spinning. Now, the Tiger and Bull attacks were definitely faster, but somewhat the same as expert mode. What did change though was this stupid snake attack. The platform started out fast, which is what I thought they'd keep doing, but then they started to slow down, which really changed up the timing. Basically, towards the end of this attack, I'd have to jump on the ground in between the platforms, which was so hard to get the hang of. However, around 15 minutes in, I had an attempt where I was barely getting the snake attack, and I knew I had to make the most of this opportunity. Come on, how's it not done? I don't understand. It's taking so freaking long. Yes! Oh my gosh, we didn't get hit! Let's go! I don't think we got the S rank because we did not get enough parries. But that does not even matter. That literally doesn't even matter. Let's go, bro. Man, was I relieved to be done with Ribby and Croaks. That last phase was a nightmare, but I couldn't believe it only took us about 15 minutes to beat it. This meant we were now onto Hildeberg, the boss that I dreaded the most in Inkwell Isle 1. This boss had a whopping 8 phases, which only got progressively harder, and to say I was intimidated was an understatement. I had built up a good reserve of extra time with how fast I completed the first 3 bosses, but I knew I could very well spend it all up here on Hildeberg. Oh, and to top it off, I didn't even have bombs yet, since you need to access Inkwell Isle 2 to unlock them. I took a final moment to hype myself up, but all I could do now was enter the boss fights. Phase 1 was short and easy. I didn't notice too much of a change from expert mode, and there's not much to say here. I usually like to sit up at the top of the screen with bombs in phase 2, but this time I didn't have that luxury. This phase lasted pretty long because of this, but I still came out of it with all 3 of my HP. These green blimps started showing up in phase 3, and they had a decent bit of health, which made them quite the nuisance to get rid of. However, like phase 1, phase 3 was very fast, and I found myself moving on. In phase 4, I fought these twins who spawned a vortex at me, shooting out a circular streak of bullets. More of these blimps showed up as well, which made for a tricky phase if I put myself in an unfavorable position. However, through the use of a well-placed super and some decent tracking, I managed to finish this phase while keeping all my HP. This was still my first attempt, and I had just made it halfway through the boss fights. Moving on to phase 5, I kept my HP once again, and I was surprised to find out how fast this phase actually was. Phase 6 was something I was not looking forward to. Hildeberg now transformed into an archer, shooting out one main arrow followed by a cluster of blue stars. These stars would follow me until I got rid of them. This phase was going to be much harder without bombs, and even more of these blimps were sent out as well. Phase 6 was long, but I kept dodging all the blue stars and blimps along the way. Beating a Master Quest boss on my first try would be monumental, and I couldn't throw away this opportunity. Right when I thought I couldn't survive another blue star, Hildeberg morphed into her 7th phase, and I only lost 1 HP in phase 6. I knew Hildeberg would send out 2 to 3 green blimps at the same time during this phase, which I knew would be no easy task to dodge. But because of a well-placed super right at the start of this phase, I got rid of the 3 blimps, all while sending Hildeberg into her final phase without having to dodge a single attack. This was it. It was still my very first attempt, in a promising one nonetheless. But this was also going to be the hardest phase of the boss. 2 different types of UFOs would be sent out, both sending down beams that would damage me if I made one wrong decision. Yellow stars also came barreling from the right, which in combination with the UFOs would require all of my focus. One faulty mistake and I'd be clipped by a UFO beam or a star, and this phase was not gonna be short. Could I really beat a boss on my first try on one of the hardest Cuphead mods with no previous practice? If I could, this would create a crucial time barrier, taking off so much pressure for the additional bosses of this challenge. Yes sir, another super, let's go. Keep going through. Gosh dang it. That's fine. It's only, we still have 1 more HP. Yo! First try? What? There's no way we just did that. There's no way. What? We did it on our legit first try? It felt amazing to beat Hildeberg on our first try, which was so much faster than the 50 minutes I was giving myself for each boss. It had been less than an hour and a half, and I was already on the last boss of Inkwell Isle 1, Cagney Carnation. This boss fight consisted of 2 different phases, each lasting about 1 minute and 45 seconds. So to say the least, Cagney Carnation was pretty long. Phase 1 had 2 main sections. First, Cagney would send down 3 different types of seeds that I would have to look out for. Purple seeds would spawn small plants on the ground, blue seeds would spawn chomping plants that would follow me around, and pink parryable seeds would send out orange flying plants that would shoot out small parryable pellets. After sending out seeds, Cagney would either shoot a cluster of acorns, shoot out some boomerangs that travel above and below the platforms, or send out a small cloud that deals damage on impact, which was also a new attack. If it wasn't apparent, there was a lot going on in this first phase, and Cagney would constantly switch between his 2 different types of attacks. However, after a short amount of time, I started making it to the second and final phase fairly consistently. On expert mode, this phase is usually a break from the harder first phase without that much to follow. So I was looking forward to a nice little stroll through the final phase after my troublesome efforts to get here, and okay, I've been proven wrong once again. In contrast to expert mode, it was no piece of cake to finish this boss the rest of the way. The vines Cagney sent up from these platforms came so fast, and there was almost no break to the constant dandelions on screen. There were only 2 attacks to worry about here, but this phase required such fast reflexes which caused me to die a lot. No, I should have EX'd. I should have EX'd, bro. Oh, shoot. Oh my gosh, really? I kept making it somewhat close to beating Cagney, only to make 1 fatal move, and I still could never make it to the final phase with all my HP. Still, I kept retrying, knowing that I had built up a lot of additional time over the previous bosses of Inkwell Isle 1. I hadn't been on Cagney for long, and while it was no easy feat, surely my winning attempt was near. And around 25 minutes into Cagney, I finally made it to the final phase with 3 HP, hoping to make the most of this attempt. I think we got our music reset. We got to be getting close. Yes, sir! Oh my gosh, 2 HP. Let's go. Woo! Nearly got an S rank on that as well, which is insane. With less than 2 hours on the clock, I finished Isle 1 over 2 hours ahead of schedule. Wasting no time, I continued right over to Inkwell Isle 2 to start Beppy the Clown. One thing I'll tell you is that Beppy took a huge step up from the bosses of Isle 1, and this is where I truly experienced just how hard Master Quest really was. Going into Phase 1, I thought, how could they really make this phase harder? There's just a few ducks overhead, and the main thing to worry about is Beppy's bumper car. Well, here on Master Quest, it was significantly different. Not only were the overhead ducks so much faster, but their hitboxes would shortly reappear even after shooting them down. Not to mention, the ducks dropped these bombs so fast, and Beppy gave almost no warning before speeding forwards. While this was the easiest of Beppy's 4 phases, it really set the tone for how difficult this boss fight would be. After a bit of practice, Phase 1 didn't pose too much of an issue, and I started learning Phase 2. Not too much was changed here, however, these dog balloons in this roller coaster came in so fast and relied on pure reflexes. On top of this, Phase 2 was so long as well, and so many runs I never thought I'd see the end of it. Looking back, using Smoke Bomb for Beppy the Clown was quite a big flaw that would end up biting me in the back later in this challenge. Basically, Smoke Bomb, while giving you invincibility during your dash, also reduces the length of your dash, which is a nerf I was not expecting Master Quest to add. If I had switched to a more underrated charm such as Whetstone, I would have a much easier time during the second phase, but alas, I can't change my past mistakes. So I struggled a lot here in Phase 2. Despite the fact that I was able to get off a lot of spread EX, as this phase just broke me down. But even so, I managed to make it to Phase 3 more often after some practice, which unfortunately didn't get any easier. The roller coaster now had 2 times the passengers, leaving much less space for me to dodge, and Beppy's horseshoe attacks greatly increased in speed. Between the second and third phases, I had already been stuck here for 25 minutes, and I hadn't even reached the final phase yet. But I kept chipping away at Beppy slowly, and a few tries later, I found myself at the final phase. At first glance, it seemed as though nothing was changed. That was until Beppy lowered the platforms. I couldn't spend too much time on an individual platform because after a short time they would disappear. This alone added a depth of difficulty, but it only got harder once the penguins were sent out. Not only were the baseballs the penguins threw faster, but they also each sent out 2 at once. This made for such a daunting phase, but beating Beppy in less than a half an hour could make a huge difference to our run, so I gave it my best shot. No! EX! I should have EX'd! No! No! Man, it hurt to get so close but still die. I tried my best to keep my spirits up, making it to the final phase a little more often. However, I'd always only make it with 1 HP, causing me to die again. No! And again. No! I had surpassed my 50-minute time limit, and the only thing saving me now was the extra time I had bought myself. I knew it would be almost impossible for me to make it to the final phase with all my HP considering the amount of practice I had, so I came up with a foolproof strategy to complete this final phase. First, I would get rid of the penguin to the far left and use the Supr when I could to damage Beppy, all while getting rid of the rest of the penguins. The only problem being I couldn't always build up a Supr fast enough to get rid of all the penguins. While not perfect, with the limited time I had, this was the best strategy I had to work with, and with the time ticking away, I made it to the final phase once again. However, I only had 1 HP. Was this newfound strategy gonna be enough to carry me through Beppy's incredibly difficult last phase without getting hit? Come on, finish it! Come on! Yes, sir! Beppy the clown! Yes! Oh my gosh! No, we didn't even get damaged. Hit in the final phase. I can't even speak. Let's go. It took about an hour, but we had finished our first boss of Inkwell Isle 2. While I had spent 10 minutes longer than I should have, it didn't make a difference because I saved so much time earlier. I was hoping to stay consistent on time for the rest of this isle as I headed over to our next boss, Baroness von Bonbon. Now, Bonbon is usually not too much of an issue, but what made her quite tricky here on Master Quest was that she sent out all 5 of her minions instead of 3 at random. The one benefit was that they always came out in the same order. However, there was another issue that I had to grapple. Throughout this fight, there were so many jelly beans walking around, and as a surprise, they would jump up as well. My first reaction was to equip Smoke Bomb to easily dash through the jelly beans and certain minions like the candy corn. However, there was still something missing. I figured it was the perfect time to buy Charge, as it can usually plow through almost any boss. But there was one problem. After spending up 4 of my precious coins to buy this weapon, I realized Charge had been greatly nerfed. It usually takes about 4 charge shots to build up an EX. However, on Master Quest, each full charge shot barely contributed to my super meter. So fairly quickly, I dropped Charge and was back to square one. I didn't really mind the first 4 minions. However, the cupcake was where I mostly lost my HP. Besides having to dodge the cupcake and the jelly beans, Bonbon also shot out cotton candy during this phase, which added another layer of difficulty. I kept dying on this cupcake and overall was getting nowhere, so I knew it was time to change up my strategy. Taking some time to think, Roundabout and Spread would be my best bet for weapons here, but what about Charm? Smoke Bomb allowed me to dodge some hard attacks, but the nerf placed on it really started to get in my way. Since this mod doesn't include the DLC, my charm options were quite limited, but then something occurred to me that I hadn't thought of. What if one of the most generally underrated charms in the game could be the turning point for me that would tip the odds in my favor? What if I switched out Smoke Bomb for Whetstone? Losing the invincibility frames during my dashes would be tough. However, I believed Whetstone could allow me to do some good additional damage and get me out of some sticky situations. Since I spent all my coins on Charge, which I didn't even end up using, I now had to complete the 2 run and gun levels in this isle if I wanted a chance to test out this strategy. Right about now, I was very glad that the run and gun levels weren't buffed, and about 5 minutes later, I was able to buy Whetstone. It did take some adjusting to get used to Whetstone, but overall, I do think the strategy paid off. Finally, I started to make it to the final phase, and while I still lost 2 HP in Bonbon's previous phases the majority of the time, this still encouraged me. The main thing I can say about Bonbon's final phase is that it was fast. Her heads moved around so quickly, and while I didn't think this phase's attacks were too much harder than expert mode, it was noticeably longer, which caused me to die quite a few times. Almost have a super, bro. Oh, shoot. However, with each attempt, I became more consistent at beating the minions while keeping my HP, and all I had to do now was further learn the final phase. It had been almost an hour since I started Baroness von Bonbon, but I finally had a good attempt where I nailed all my dodges and with a well-played Supr beat our second boss in Inkwell Isle 2. Let's go! I didn't think we had it, but we did! Oh, yes, sir! We are now on to Jimmy the Great. One thing you'll notice is that the playing levels of Master Quest can be some of the hardest, and Jimmy was no exception. This boss fight consisted of 5 phases, all but one being quite difficult to capture. Usually, Jimmy has 3 possible attacks he can do in the first phase, choosing one at random, but in Master Quest, you're put through all 3 possible attacks. It wasn't so much the attacks themselves that were hard for me to master, but more so the amount of time this phase lasted. First, we were put through the swords attack, which was much faster than expert mode, but not too troublesome. Jimmy's cat attack was annoying as usual, but wasn't too hard to avoid. I noticed the biggest speed change during the treasure attack and lost the most HP here. These 3 attacks put together in succession made for quite the difficult phase, and this alone took some time to master, which I didn't have an infinite amount of. But at least the next phase was the easiest of the boss, and there was nothing to worry about here. Oh, I spoke too soon. Why are the pillars so close together? Yeah, Jimmy gave us no break in phase 2. Since there wasn't much room between the pillars, I barely had enough time to find the opening to the other side. And these saws bounce around so much faster than normal, which made for a surprisingly difficult phase. If I didn't move fast enough here, I'd be stuck at the back of the pillars and not have enough time to find a way through. But if I went too fast, I'd risk getting hit by a saw. To beat this phase, I devised a speedrunning strategy that I'd previously seen. If I shrunk right after I used a bomb, another bomb would be sent out right after I unshrunk. This would allow me more time to better position myself. However, I would only get 1 bomb shot to make an opening in the pillars, and if I missed once, I'd be sent all the way back to the first phase. Phase 2 took a good deal of time to get the hang of and truly master this shrinking strategy. However, we are now onto the 3rd phase, and at least I'd get a little break here, not having to worry about getting hit. And, oh wait, for once this was actually a phase I didn't have to stress over. These mummies seemed a little faster than normal, but overall phase 3 wasn't noticeably harder than expert mode, and I don't think I actually ever died here. I just sat at the top of the screen, easily allowing most of my bombs to hit, which quickly brought me to phase 4. I can't tell you how many times I'd make it to this phase with all my HP only to completely mess up my run. I didn't necessarily mind this phase too much by itself, but it took a lot of focus to not get hit after going through the 3 previous phases. Cuphead shot out more bullets and they were faster as well. He also had more mobility left to right, pushing me into tight spaces if I didn't keep track of the hats. And speaking of the hat, it was quite a bit faster, and dodging the bullets it shot out along with the other attacks made for a tricky phase that was heavily centered around fast reflexes. All of this so far was nothing compared to the nightmare that was phase 5. Normally this phase is pretty fast and there are 2 attacks you have to worry about. The easiest of the 2 are the rings that Jimmy shoots out. The harder main attack being these 3 pyramids that circle around, in which one of them will send out a cross pattern that you'll have to dodge. How could Master Quest possibly make this harder? Well, how about making 2 of the pyramids open up instead of 1? This attack right here was so disorientating and I just couldn't figure out, no matter how many times I got here, where I could position myself to not get hit. On top of that, Jimmy sent out a lot more of these rings, which was very easy to get hit by if I didn't bait them correctly. The other 4 phases, while hard, felt doable, but this last phase seemed like it was on a whole other level, and I didn't know if I had the time to fully understand it. So I opted for a strategy that I'll almost always shut down immediately. I thought if I didn't get hit at all in the first 4 phases and made it to the final phase with 4 HP instead of 3, then I might just have the safety barrier I needed to beat this boss. That's right, I switched charms to extra heart, which reduced my overall damage by 5%. This damage reduction is usually enough to hinder me from using it, but in this case I felt I needed as much HP as I could get for this final phase. So I put my new strategy into effect, waiting for the perfect opportunity where I had all my HP for the final phase. It was most certainly pressuring knowing I couldn't lose HP during the first 4 phases, but I kept pushing forward and eventually I found the chance I had been waiting for. I entered the final phase with 4 HP and I knew it was unlikely that I'd get this opportunity again anytime soon, so I tried my best not to waste my shots. Please! I've used 2 Suprs now, come on! Come on! Yes! Let's go! took all our HP, but we did it. Oh my gosh, yes! I had just barely managed to beat Jimmy, losing 3 of my 4 HP in the final phase. At this point, I had over an hour I could spend on each boss as I made up so much time overall. And since I just beat what I thought was going to be one of the hardest bosses of Master Quest, I really started to think the 16 hours I gave myself was too much. But nonetheless, we were now onto Wally Werbles, who I knew wouldn't be easy as well. Except for his first phase, apparently. I didn't notice much of a difference from expert mode here. There were the lines of birds like usual, and Wally switched between spitting out eggs and his bullet fingers attack. Well, I thought this was going to be one of the trickier bosses of Master Quest, but maybe I'd be proven wrong. Yeah. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Phase 2 was extremely intimidating. Not only was the pattern of Wally's feather attack changed, but his feathers also came in at an almost unfathomably fast speed. After doing this attack a couple of times, he would briefly switch over to his attacks from Phase 1, which were greatly sped up. Phase 2 was a real wake-up call to just how difficult Wally Werbles would be. I kept making it to Phase 2 with all my HP most of the time, but it was like my mind couldn't process the amount of projectiles that were on screen. Now, what was usually the easiest part of this boss was what led to the majority of my deaths here on Master Quest. Anytime I'd feel I was starting to understand the rhythm of Wally's feathers, the lines of birds would fly across the screen, causing me to lose focus and die. I tried to get rid of these birds the best I could, but they just kept breaking my concentration, and I really felt lost. I knew I also couldn't shrink during this attack, as if I did, I would have to survive 5 times as long because of the low amount of damage I'd be dealing. However, I knew I built up a good deal of extra time, and if Wally took a little longer than I was hoping, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I pushed my reflexes to the limit, making small, fast movements up and down, and eventually, I finally made it to the 3rd phase. But oh boy, did I not get a break here. There wasn't as much on screen to actually dodge, but the precision here was unreal. There were so many more eggs circling Willy than on expert mode, and the spaces to exit this circle were at times incredibly small, leaving almost no room for error. Because of this, I died quickly on my first attempt here, but when I looked at the time, I realized we had passed the 5-hour mark, 25 minutes of which had been spent on Wally Werbles. And to make the situation worse, not only had I not even experienced the final phase, but I had only been to the 3rd phase a single time. This meant I now had exactly 1 hour to spend on each boss. Even from the short time I spent on Wally, this was the hardest boss I had attempted so far, and the level of difficulty truly rose above anything I had experienced over the past year that I had been playing Cuphead. This drove up the pressure level so much. But even so, I still had the huge time barrier I built up earlier, and surely I wouldn't waste it all here. Practice is what I needed, which is exactly what I did. Slowly, I started making it to the 3rd phase more often. From here, I figured if I could parry all the bullets Wally shot at me, I could build up a super, saving myself from some of the damage I'd be taking otherwise. Slowly but surely, I started to notice progress. I still hadn't made it to the final phase, but Wally started to feel possible. And then, I saw the light at the end of the dark tunnel. I reached the final phase for the first time. The 2 phases that led up to this point were truly some of the hardest phases I'd experienced, and I knew surely it couldn't get harder than that. Wally spat out his first piece of trash like normal, and then I felt a huge pit in my stomach. The ultimate moment of despair. Despite the insane amount of effort it took to get here, this final phase blew past my expectations and was the hardest of this boss fight. Everything here was sped up so much. The hardest part for me being when Wally spit out some garbage. Not only were these projectiles so fast, but Wally would shoot them up above the screen, exiting my vision for a couple seconds. All of a sudden, trash would come from nowhere at an insane speed, and at the same time, I had to worry about the pellets from these medic birds and Wally's heart attack as well. If I even wanted a chance to complete this final phase, I needed to get here with all my HP, which seemed almost impossible. But I kept practicing, trying out all the charms at my disposal. I went through whetstone, extra HP, coffee, smoke bomb, but I just couldn't seem to keep my HP for the final phase. Another half hour went by, then an hour and a half. I'd been on Wally Warbles for 2 hours, having made it to the final phase a grand total of 3 times, not even making it halfway through. I was so far off track with this boss, and I now wasted all my extra time built up. I was back to square one with 50 minutes to spend per boss. Feeling hopeless, I ended stream and called it a day without having beaten Wally Warbles. After a well-needed break, I came back feeling a bit better, and I also had some additional knowledge that I didn't have before. See, another Cuphead YouTuber, Haragitia, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong by the way, who's an expert at Master Quest, reached out to me and gave me a few tips. He showed me the best places to save up and use supers, and his strategy consisted of using coffee. Seriously, huge thanks to Haragitia for showing me this strategy, and y'all should definitely check out his channel. Despite all the time I had wasted, I vowed I was gonna do my best to not pay attention to the timer and instead focus all my energy into dodging each individual attack. With this newfound strategy and mindset, I started the timer back up, and I wasn't gonna quit until I gave Wally Warbles everything I had. From the first few tries, I could already tell I was playing better. I found I was much more consistent with the second phase, and I was dying much less in phase 3 as well. Hoping to keep up this consistency, all I had to learn now was the final phase. In the first 30 minutes back, I had already made it to the final phase more than the first 2 hours I spent on this boss, and it really was starting to feel somewhat possible. Every time I died, I pressed retry just as fast, trying as best as I could to not let the time pressure get to me. It was the hardest battle of reflexes I had ever attempted, but I kept pushing forward, knowing there had to be an opening somewhere. And then I saw my chance. The opening I was looking for. I made it to the final phase with all 3 of my HP, and I went into a mode of focus unlike anything before. I was determined to beat Wally Warbles. Yes, sir! We did it! Let's go! Oh, yes! Oh my gosh! It was finally over. It took a lot out of me, but I had beaten Wally Warbles. However, I couldn't spend more than 50 minutes per boss, and the timer was still rolling, so I couldn't take any breaks. After 3 long hours, I finally headed over to the final boss of Inkwell Isle 2, Grim Matchstick. Firstly, I bought Lobber because it was going to be a beast for Grim Matchstick, especially phase 2. I usually like to run charge for Grim as well, but since it was nerfed quite a bit, I opted to go with roundabouts. Grim's attacks in phase 1 were definitely sped up, and Grim had a couple new fireball attacks as well. Usually Grim shoots fireballs that arc up and down, but he now shot out some straight fireballs as well. I didn't mind each individual attack too much, but this phase was quite long, which caused me to lose my consistency fairly often. But it didn't take me too long to make it to phase 2, which was definitely better for me. There were quite a few jumping fireballs, but Lobber made pretty quick work of this phase, and thankfully I rarely died here. But as was the case for many of the previous bosses, the final phase of Grim gave me the most trouble. First of all, the clouds were greatly sped up, which made platforming much harder. Grim also shot out his fireballs so much faster than expert mode. I found I could deal decent damage with roundabout and Lobber in this phase, but so many times I'd accidentally blow up a fireball right next to me, causing me to die. This is why I usually like to use charge during this final phase, as I tend to have much more control over the majority of my shots. But was it really worth it to use a nerfed weapon here? I didn't have a lot of time to play around with different strategies, but I swapped out roundabout for charge. I noticed that the first phase seemed to be taking longer than usual, which set up an additional roadblock. But I really felt that charge could make a big difference for me in the final phase, so I kept at the strategy. Shortly later, I started making it to the final phase a little more often, and from the limited amount of practice I had, I could tell that this was definitely the right move. I just had to make it here with 2 to 3 HP, which is exactly what I did 15 minutes after making this weapon change. Yes, sir! Is that an S rank, bro? There's no freaking way. 812, 813, let's go, baby. There's no way, was that an S rank? Yes, sir, that literally was. It felt so good to get an on-plane S rank, especially since this hadn't happened since the root pack. After the insane struggle that was Isle 2, we were finally onto Inkwell Isle 3. I hadn't made up much time on Grim Matchstick, but if I could just keep up this pace for the additional bosses, I just might have a chance at beating this challenge. I switched charms back to Smoke Bomb and changed out charge for spread as well. And without wasting any further time, I started the first boss of Inkwell Isle 3, Rumor Honeybottoms. Phase 1 didn't seem too buffed and I found myself getting past it most of the time. I couldn't say the same thing about Phase 2, however. This phase felt extremely long and dodging the attacks here was no easy task as well. First of all, through the entirety of this phase, the worker bees continued to fly across the screen, which was a huge nuisance. Rumor's bullet attack was much faster and so were the purple triangles, but oddly enough, the attack I minded the most was Rumor's pink orbs. They really moved around fast and I think Smoke Bomb was the main problem here. Since Smoke Bomb reduced the length of my dash, my mobility was greatly affected and a lot of the time I found I just wasn't fast enough to escape the path of the orbs. However, I believed this charm would be helpful for the final phase, so I didn't switch it out. Little did I know this tiny decision would bite me in the back later on. Nonetheless, I kept going and eventually I made it to the final phase. I hope things might get a little easier after the drawn out second phase, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. There were many more fists on screen here and they moved so much faster than expert mode. And then out of nowhere, Rumor would swipe her saw over the majority of the screen, which I wasn't ready for so many times. The charm I thought would do me so much good here ended up being a huge deterrent to many of my attempts. While I could dash through many of the fists without taking damage, the dash length reduction really held me back. I needed to be able to move fast in this phase, and with Smoke Bomb equipped, that just wasn't happening enough. But for whatever reason, I didn't switch out my charm, which looking back, I really wish I did. I continue to struggle reaching the 9-hour mark, barely having been at the final phase. Knowing there were only 7 hours remaining and I was barely halfway through the bosses really put on the pressure. Through the course of the next half an hour, I would make it to the final phase a few more times, but to no avail. I'd never make it here with more than 2 HP and I couldn't figure out a good strategy to complete this final phase. At this point, my nerves were through the roof. After taking so much time to beat Wally Warbles, I really hoped that I might be able to turn things around, but the situation was looking bleaker with each passing moment. I had put everything in, but I came away feeling defeated. Just before hitting 9 hours and 40 minutes, I ended stream very disappointed for the time I had lost. I now couldn't spend longer than 43 minutes on each boss, and I knew that some of the hardest bosses of Master Quest were still waiting for me. To say completing this challenge seemed hopeless is an understatement. I had spent almost an hour and a half on Rumor, who I wouldn't even consider one of the top 5 hardest bosses of Master Quest. To beat each remaining boss in less than 43 minutes truly felt beyond my grasp, and every sign was telling me that what came next would be impossible. You know, it's easy to let negativity take control when a situation looks hopeless, and I really was feeling hopeless. I knew the odds of completing the entirety of Aisle 3 in under 6.5 hours were very low, but instead of letting the pressure get to me, I decided if this was going to be the way I was going to lose this challenge, I'd at least fail without the feeling of negativity stabbing me in the back. So I planned one final stream, one final chance to test my skills against the impossible. I thought out my lotto for all the remaining bosses, and all I could do now was push aside the constant pressure I was feeling and focus like I never had before. Firstly, I swapped out Smoke Bomb for Whetstone, which I should have done a long time ago. Since Smoke Bomb had only been hindering me, especially in the final phase, I opted for more damage. I did believe this would help me in the long run, but my playing seemed mediocre from the get-go. I made it to the final phase with 1 HP pretty much right away, but instead of losing my hope because of the unfavorable situation, I continued my mindset of pushing away negativity and not focusing so much on the time. With low expectations, I then continued to accomplish something that really surprised me. Yes, sir, we did it, yo! Oh my gosh, yes, 1 HP. Oh, yes, sir, baby. It had only been 7 minutes since I started stream, and Rumor was defeated. I couldn't believe how fast this was and that I managed to complete the final phase even on 1 HP. But my celebration was cut short, as even though completing Master Quest in the time remaining would still take a miracle, I didn't want to go down without a fight. And our next boss, Werner Werman, was a fight I was not looking forward to for a couple different reasons. I went on to beat the Rugged Ridge Run and Gun to unlock Werner, and I continued my race against time. Phase 1 was really quite easy besides being a little fast, but Phase 2 was where issues started. Instead of staying still, Werner now moved side to side on his cart, shooting out small pellets every now and then along with his difficult flamethrower and bottle cap saw attacks. It was very tricky to tell which side of Werner I wanted to be on as he moved around, but I did my best to not let this phase intimidate me. Soon I found myself making it to the final phase, but this one was some real nightmare material. The bottle cap saws from the previous phase kept moving side to side, and with the added speed of Werner's regular attacks during this phase, I knew this wasn't going to be easy by any means. Still, I kept pushing forward, refusing to let the pressure of my bleak situation hold me back. I began to make it to the final phase more and more often, learning it step by step. As I became more consistent in doing this, the final phase started to seem possible. I found I could save myself from a lot of damage, stalling in the air by parrying Cats and Wagon with Whetstone, followed up with the Spread EX, resulting in a bunch of bonus damage as well. Refining this strategy, I felt victory was around the corner despite the difficulty of this boss. Yes, sir, baby! Literally almost an S rank as well. Let's go! We didn't even lose HP in that final phase. Let's go, baby. It took me approximately 35 minutes to beat Werner, and I couldn't believe I managed to save a little bit of time. But we weren't done yet. I pushed down any feelings of pressure and went on to our next boss, Captain Brinybeard, without a break. Despite the great pressure it caused me on Rumor, I decided to run Smoke Bomb for this boss as I thought the invincibility could actually prove helpful and I didn't need to move around too quickly. Brinybeard had 2 phases, but his attacks didn't seem too much harder than Expert Mode. The main thing I can say about Brinybeard is that his boss fight was long, especially the first phase. I was able to do a decent bit of spread damage, but even with that, I knew phase 1 could last 2 to 3 minutes, and if I died here a lot, I'd be wasting a lot of time. Because the last phase was decently long as well, I figured I'd need to make it here with at least 2 HP if I wanted a good shot at beating Captain Brinybeard. But less than 10 minutes in, that's exactly what I did. Concentrating my best, I used Roundabout to full effect, and after a good deal of dodging, I found another roadblock had been eliminated. Come on, bro. We gotta do it here. Yes, bro, let's go! Oh, hey! I was astounded to have beaten Captain Brinybeard in 7 minutes. I managed to save some valuable time in the last couple bosses. Was there still a slim chance that I might actually beat this challenge? Well, our next 2 bosses were without a doubt going to be some of the hardest of Master Quests, and what do you know, they were both plain bosses. Feeling a little tug of dread, I went over to Calamaria to start what could be the run ender. All 3 of her phases offered much difficulty, and what came next was not going to be easy. Phase 1 was long, requiring me to use at least 2 supers to complete it. There is a new blue fish attack, and all of Calamaria's usual attacks were greatly increased in speed. To top it off, Calamaria will usually do 2 attacks at once, but many times on Master Quest, she would do 3 attacks at once, which was so overwhelming. But Phase 2 gave me no break. Calamaria froze me at an extra fast rate, and there were so many projectiles from these eels on screen as well. This made it very difficult to position myself to not get hit, and just like Phase 1, Phase 2 was no quick phase. But these first 2 phases would pale in comparison to the 3rd and final phase. The spike platforms came at me so fast, and many more ghost skulls were sent out as well. And with Calamaria freezing me very often, this made for an ultra hard phase. My reaction time had to be perfect in order to unfreeze myself fast enough to get out of the way of the spike platforms and the ghost skulls. I knew it would take me a long time to learn this phase perfectly, which I didn't have, so I'd have to opt with getting to the final phase with 3 HP instead. But that was the problem. As I said, the first 2 phases were very long and difficult, and I could easily waste all my time on this boss. Still, I vowed I wouldn't let the pressure get to me anymore, and that was a promise I was going to keep. I kept pushing forward despite all the odds against me. I found myself taking damage every time in Phase 2, but that didn't matter. If I ran out the clock in Calamaria, so be it, but I would not lose myself to the hopelessness. Pressing on, I finally had a good run. At the end of Phase 2, I managed to keep all 3 of my HP. I might not get this chance again for a while, so in complete focus, I put in everything I had. Oh, shoot, I almost made that. Yes, sir, baby! Let's go! Let's go! Yes! Oh, Calamaria! Ah! Oh, that's so god! One of the hardest bosses of Master Quest had been completed. Despite losing 2 HP in the final phase, I managed to keep my cool and pull ahead. Looking at the time, to my surprise, I found it only took me 15 minutes to beat Calamaria, which was unbelievable. I didn't know how I was managing to somewhat keep our run alive. Because of the time I saved, I could now spend an hour on each of the remaining bosses, but I knew my situation could take a turn for the worse at any moment, just like it did when I was fighting Wally Warble, so I didn't weaken my concentration. Dr. Call was our next boss, and was one that I was greatly dreading since the beginning of this challenge. Call is hard enough on expert mode, but Master Quest truly brought this boss fight to the next level. Phase 1 proved to be a great barrier from the start. Call had so much health in this phase, and there were a wide variety of attacks. First of all, the parryable bot that came out of Call's chest was so fast, and if I didn't parry it right away, it would be game over in the blink of an eye. Once the drones were sent out of the robot's stomach, I went over to get rid of them, but there was a problem. They had so much health to the point where it was impossible to get rid of all of them, and there were also more drones than usual. This added a layer of difficulty that made this first phase incredibly difficult. Between the laser, bot, and drone attacks, there was so much to worry about on screen, but this wasn't even the end of phase 1. Getting rid of the laser would make the robot shoot out nut and bolt projectiles constantly. Black bombs with a massive blast radius would be sent out after destroying the robot's stomach. Destroying the robot's abdomen would initiate 2 attacks as well. A magnet attack that would pull you in, and an arm attack that would send out a ton of little energy projectiles. So yeah, you could say there was a lot to worry about in phase 1. Struggling to make it past this phase, I eventually got a taste of the second phase. Usually you could use one super to pretty much end this phase right away, so certainly there wasn't anything that would make this phase that hard, right? Well, that was completely utterly wrong. Call had so much health in this phase, causing me to have to build up a second super, but that was the least of my worries. You know those little energy walls that appear in the final phase? Well, I had to worry about them here as well. Combine this with the black bombs on screen, which had an increase in speed as well, made for such a challenging phase. If I didn't get rid of the black bombs fast enough, I would be stuck behind a wall, and I didn't even know what the final phase looked like yet, which was typically the hardest of this boss fights. For the next half an hour, I struggled greatly on these first 2 phases. It was just so difficult to remain consistent. Was this where I finally met my end? Was all the effort and save time from the past few bosses a complete waste? Was Dr. Call the run ender? I couldn't let these thoughts get to me. My situation looked so bleak an hour and a half ago, and I couldn't let the pressure get to my head. I was getting flashbacks from my futile attempts at Wally Warbles earlier in the run. I could have taken this as a bad omen, but instead I remembered my mistakes. I remembered how I crumbled underneath the intense pressure of this challenge, and I couldn't let that happen again. Answering the dark thoughts in my mind, yes, this could be the run ender, but this could also be the great turning point in this challenge. With every ounce of focus I had left, I kept pushing forward, and eventually I made it to the final phase, and I died right away. But I noticed that the final phase was not much harder than expert mode. The projectiles from the red diamond came out fast, but the pattern was practically the same. The projectiles from the blue diamond had their pattern changed up a bit, however. It's hard to explain, but the projectiles almost circled around, leaving big gaps between each line of energy bullets, but passing through these lines was pretty tricky. Even with the added difficulty of the blue diamond attack, I had a feeling I could get the hang of this final phase after a bit of practice and some HP. I kept working through the first 2 phases, barely making it to the final phase. I still found it so hard to remain consistent in these first 2 phases, but all I needed was one opening, one chance, one good run to end Dr. Call once and for all. And eventually, I found that run. I made it to the final phase with 2 HP, and Dr. Call was going down. Ah, that's bad. Hopefully that still did damage. I'm praying that it did. Yes! What? That was so fast! Let's go! Baby! No way! Dude! We literally did it! One of the bosses that I was dreading the most had been defeated. On top of that, it only took me 50 minutes, which gave me about 4.5 hours for the 4 remaining bosses. This greatly helped my situation, but we still weren't done with the challenge. I was starting to feel tired at this point, as I had already beaten 5 bosses in this single stream, but I had to keep my winning streak. I took a short moment to refocus before it was time to start Sally's stage play. Though I I was a little wary, I decided to go with Smoke Bomb as it would definitely help for the second phase, which we'll be seeing very soon. I was relieved to find phase 1 was about as easy as expert mode, so I barely had trouble passing this phase with all my HP. The second phase made up for this lack of difficulty, however. 6 wind-up rats were sent out instead of the usual 4, and Sally's attacks were so much faster in general. I was hoping to make it past this phase without losing more than 1 HP, but then something happens. My headset cut out, causing me to go down to 1 HP, but I also completed the second phase as well. I could have just reset, but every minute counted here, so I figured I'd give it a go. Could I really beat Sally's stage play without sound? I had no experience at the final 2 phases, but thankfully they weren't as bad as phase 2. Phase 3 sent out more lightning, but mainly called for consistency, which was hard on 1 HP. But after a short time, Sally entered her final phase. I didn't notice too much of an increase in difficulty from expert mode, but like the case for many phases in Master Quest, Sally's final phase was long. It would be great to beat Sally here and now on my first attempt at the final phase, so I did my best to keep my cool. Charge shot after charge shot, I slowly creeped closer to the end of this phase, hoping this would be the attempt. Yes, sir, bro! We literally did it without sound! Let's go! I literally can't hear any game volume right now. What? I couldn't believe I beat another boss in such a short amount of time. After reconnecting my headset, I went over to the final boss before Inkwell Hell, the Phantom Express. Phase 1 was mostly normal except for these flying pumpkins, which continued to be a problem throughout the further phases of this boss. The pumpkins flew across the screen quite quickly, and the ingots dropped very fast as well. This caused me to take a decent bit of damage in this phase, but once I learned how to parry the ingots quickly and get rid of the flying pumpkins, I found myself making it to phase 2 pretty much every time. Once again, the flying pumpkins continue to be a problem here. I didn't particularly mind dodging the skeleton conductor's hands, but many times I couldn't get rid of the pumpkins fast enough and I'd be pushed right into the path of damage. But like phase 1, once I got the hang of this phase, it ceased to be an issue. Phase 3 was a little long, but overall not too bad. The ghosts in this phase flew a little faster and the lollipop ghost had more health, but once again, this was a phase I didn't mind all that much. I can say the final phase was definitely the hardest, but not too terrible. The bone rings and fireballs were decently fast, and I did lose a few runs to this phase. It was a little tricky to keep my HP for the first 3 phases, even though they weren't too hard, but I knew once I could do that, I'd have a decent shot at beating the Phantom Express. And around 10 minutes into this boss, I did just that, making quick work of the Phantom Express. Darn it. Yes, sir, baby! Let's go! Phantom Express, baby. Let's go. Once again, I sped through another boss, and I really did improve my situation from a couple hours earlier. I had about 4 hours remaining to beat the final 2 bosses of this challenge, which took off some pressure. But I didn't want to celebrate just yet, as I knew time-wise, King Dice was the longest boss in the game, and Master Quest greatly buffed the devil. I had come so far over the course of the last 2 hours, and I had really surprised myself. Could I carry this challenge the final few steps to the end of the finish line, or would this be all for nothing? There was only one way to find out by entering Inkwell Hell and moving on to the second to last boss of this challenge, King Dice. Now, I didn't usually mind King Dice on expert mode, but as I talked about, no matter how hard King Dice's attacks were gonna be, he was gonna be the longest fight of Master Quest. Keeping this in mind, I knew if I made too many careless mistakes, I could easily waste a ton of time on this boss, so I did my best to stay consistent. I opted to go with the Tipsy Troop, Pip and Dot, and Mangosteen for the 3 mandatory mini-bosses. I didn't mind the Tipsy Troop and Mangosteen all that much, but I found I ran into a little trouble with Pip and Dot. The spiked floor moved backwards faster than usual, and all of Pip and Dot's other attacks were sped up as well. It would take a solid minute or 2 to even get to Pip and Dot, and I couldn't afford to keep wasting time here. Instead of Pip and Dot, I had 2 other options: Hocus Pocus or Fear Lab. I didn't want to do Fear Lab because usually I'm pretty inconsistent with him, which only left Hocus Pocus. Now on expert mode, if you crouch before the rabbit skulls circle in on you, you can dodge them without having to even move, but I had no idea if this trick worked on Master Quest. If it did, it would make for a very easy boss, and I'd only have to worry about the Suit of Cards attack, but if this trick didn't work, I'd be stuck having to struggle through Pip and Dot with the timer constantly ticking away. All I could do was give it a try. Once I got to Hocus Pocus, I jumped on top of the card, waited for the rabbit skull's attack, crouched down, and The trick worked. This meant Hocus Pocus was pretty much a free pass, and I no longer had to worry about learning Pip and Dot, which was a relief. Now that I figured out the 3 mini-bosses, it was time to fight King Dice himself. The cards King Dice sent out came at a much faster rate. What made this phase disorientating, however, were these red cards thrown in next to the pink parryable cards. At first glance, it was a little hard to spot the parryable cards because of how fast they were moving, but I found that if I just looked for the suit on the face of each card, I was able to find which one was parryable without too much of an issue. See, the parryable cards were always the suit of hearts, while every other suit belonged to non-parryable cards that would instead deal damage. There was still one main problem, however. This phase was incredibly long. Even with the extra damage from spread, I'd have to survive 12 to 15 rotations of King Dice's card attack, and while I had a decent strategy to survive here, I knew I could easily be broken down because of this phase's length. And the more times I died here, the more I'd have to redo all 3 mini-bosses, which could very quickly rack up unwanted time. I knew I had to be consistent in this phase if I wanted to avoid the pressure of time, because the last boss of this challenge would be no pushover. I was looking to make it to the final phase with at least 2 HP. I struggled for a bit of time trying to make this the case, but eventually I made it with a whopping 6 HP, managing to not get hit once. Surely this was the run, but I knew arrogance would only set me back, so I played like I only had 1 HP. If I could beat King Dice here, I would maximize the amount of time I could spend on the final boss of this challenge, and every minute counted. So I went in and gave it my best shots. Come on, baby. Getting close here. Supr. Yes, sir! Holy crap. We didn't even lose any HP. Let's go. Not only had I S-ranked King Dice, but I didn't lose a single HP as well, which felt absolutely amazing. What was even better was that I had about 3.5 hours left to beat the devil, which was the final boss of this challenge. 3.5 hours seemed like a long time, but I knew the devil was going to be one of the hardest bosses of Master Quest, and I could very easily spend a ton of time here and run out the clock, just like I did on Wally Warbles. A little less than 3 hours earlier, I was stuck with 43 minutes to spend on the 9 remaining bosses, and I really managed to turn the situation around despite the incredibly low odds. There were no bosses left after the devil. If I beat him here, I'd have accomplished the impossible, but if I died, all my efforts over the past 12.5 hours would have been for nothing, all wasted. I can definitely say I felt nervous, but if there was one thing I learned over the past 3 hours, it was that nerves will only kill a challenge. So one final time, I focused up and kept myself together. My strategy for the devil was to optimize damage, so I equipped Whetstone for my charm in combination with spread and charge. Even with my high damage loadout, the first phase was very long, taking about 2 minutes on average, and I could tell this wasn't going to be easy. All of the devil's attacks in this phase were greatly sped up, and I couldn't believe just how much health the devil had. I struggled in phase 1 a lot. I found it so hard to make it past this phase, let alone even having more than 1 HP. But eventually, once I began making it to phase 2, I found that to my relief, it wasn't all that bad. I could definitely tell the devil's attacks were sped up, but just like phase 1, the main problem was that this was a long phase. Difficulty returned in phase 3, however. Not only was this phase long, but it was just as hard, if not harder, than phase 1. I constantly had to watch out for the purple henchmen shooting out skulls, and the blue poker chips fell quite fast in this phase as well. On top of that, the 3 platforms moved up and down at a disorientating rate, and the main problem was the blue imps. So many of them spawned and they traveled down so fast. Each of the devil's phases were quite a bit longer than I had anticipated, which had me thinking about the time limit that was ticking away second by second. I couldn't let this get to me. I had sped through the last 8 bosses so quickly, and I couldn't fail so close to the end with the finish line in sight. The third phase was a big issue, but I needed to improve the most at phase 1. If I could just make it past this phase with 3 HP, I'd have a very good chance at beating the devil. And a few attempts later, I did just that. I kept all my HP past the first phase and was entering the final phase with 2 HP. This was going to be the shortest and easiest phase of the devil. After everything I went through, it was finally time to put this challenge to rest. Come on. What? No! Are you kidding? What I thought would be a complete breeze was the end to my most successful run. This final phase was so much trickier and longer than I had anticipated, and what was usually quite an easy phase was greatly buffed. The poker chips fell down so much faster than even the previous phase, and so did the tears. But what messed me up the most was the platform I was standing on. It moved up and down so fast, which really screwed up the timing of my jumps. It was really disappointing to die here, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy to reach this final phase again with more than 1 HP. I still had a little over 3 hours to beat this challenge, but I started to feel a little nervous, wondering if I would throw away my shot at redemption at the last moment. But I couldn't give up now, so I kept pushing forward, dying over and over again. Another 30 minutes had passed, and I still hadn't reached the final phase again. Could this really be it? All my efforts put to rest right when victory was inches away. I remembered my bleak situation a few hours earlier at Rumor Honeybottoms. I thought how hopeless the idea of beating the remaining bosses of Master Quest in the limited time I had felt. Despite everything against me, I made it to the devil, and I'd be a fool to lose hope and let my nerves take control now. So one last time, I pushed aside the idea of the time limit and put in everything I had. And for the second time, I reached the final phase. Darn it. Yes, sir! We did it! Oh, yes! Bro, stop the time! Let's go! The full challenge, baby! Oh my gosh! Oh, I didn't think we had it! But we did! We came back! The most massive comeback literally ever. Despite all the wasted time on earlier bosses, we managed to beat the entire Cuphead Master Quest mod in under 16 hours. This was the biggest comeback that I've ever experienced in my time challenge running, and was quite an end to what I can say was the hardest gaming challenge I've ever attempted. While some parts got very stressful, I really did enjoy doing this so much, and if you enjoyed it as well, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me. Check out my other challenge videos if you found this one entertaining. But if you thought this was the pinnacle of my gaming challenges, think again. While this was the hardest challenge I've attempted up to this point, this is only the beginning. Peace out, fellas.